This is heartening to see all you folks out here. I mean, you know, it really is, because, well, I'm going to start this thing off with a quote from Mr. Gandhi, and because I don't know, you know, Scott talked about books, and books have been very important in my life. And when I was about 17 years old, I read a book, I think it was called Lead Kindly Light, about Mr. Gandhi. And I said, gee, this is quite an amazing gentleman. They didn't really talk about him too much in school. They didn't really teach us too much about Gandhi. You know, we learned a little bit. But, you know, I mean, that guy got rid of India, you know, by making salt. You know, he got rid of the British out of India by making salt, you know, and it was pretty amazing thing. So, like I say, I'm going to start off with a quote from him. My glasses
Up here ahead.
And it says, when I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love has always won. There have always been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end, they always fall. Think on it. Always. Okay, now, you know, one thing that Gandhi talked about was the importance of being a householder. And basically, what is a householder? The citizen of your country, you know, a person who takes care of his family and takes care of their community, and everybody takes care of each other. That's, you know, the householder is a good place to start. And then I want to start off with, I don't know what, one thing I do in my books I've been doing is I do a publisher's forward at the beginning. Because, you know, publishing is an interesting business. I didn't really go to school to become a publisher. But it, you know, to make a book, okay, a book is an amazing thing. It's something that you can put in your hand, you can give to somebody, they can take away. And somebody's believed it. Somebody, you know, somebody poured their heart, hopefully their heart and soul in here, not just a mercenary thing. And a book, you know, is an act of creation. Okay, it you know, hopefully at the end of the day it has a life of its own, it has a soul. Okay, and so I've been trying to talk to people about, you know, how come I became a publisher. Okay, and the main reason I became a publisher is because my dad had told me some things I didn't understand many years ago. Okay, and you know, I talked before and I tell the story of my dad, and I'm just going to tell a little bit up here. I'm going to go off a little bit different direction. But basically, my dad was in intelligence. He got involved in intelligence when he was 18 years old. On his 18th birthday, he sailed out of Portland and went to the University of Shanghai and was an exchange student. And then he got he was in Oxford in 1937 with the Dulles brothers there at a conference. And then in 1939 he graduated, went directly back to Washington, D.C., and soon ended up in the basement of the Library of Congress working under Archibald MacLeish, who was Library of Congress, OSS, and was also a member of the Order of Skull and Bones. My dad started in COI, which was Donovan's first organization, coordination of information. Went from there from OSS, 1943. He got involved into deep politics. They got taken out of the Library of Congress. He was running the Philippines desk there. In the Philippines, you know, if you want to learn about our secret history, you need to learn about the Philippines because it's very, very key to what is going on today and what has happened. Okay, but in 1943, he got taken out of the Library of Congress, got put into the military, got given 2 weeks worth of training, and got certified to being in the Army. It was the least amount of training you could give and be certified and whatnot. He was made a medic, made a lieutenant, put into G2, and put him as a personal and private secretary of Dr. Hayden on MacArthur's staff. Basically, OSS was trying to get somebody on MacArthur's staff because they didn't really trust MacArthur. And then the gentleman died. My dad took over his position and started running a bunch of guerrillas in the Philippines. Went into Manila before the troops did, and sequestered the puppet government's library. He got sued by the Japanese government for doing that, got given a Legion of Merit by the American government for doing that. And he started working with the guerrillas a lot, and the oligarchy in the Philippines, the Philippine oligarchy was very, very thin, and most of the oligarchy had been collaborators working with the Japanese. Well, Douglas MacArthur, his father, Arthur MacArthur, was the first military governor of the Philippines, and Douglas grew up in the Philippines, so he was a lot of good friends with these oligarchical people. Well, there's a book out there, it's called Betrayal of the Philippines by Hernando Abaya. He was one of the main journalists in the Philippines, and it tells a story where they started to put all the collaborators in jail. And my dad was working with the guerrillas, helping them set up a government and helping them set up a diplomatic mission. Well, by the time MacArthur came back, he found his friends in jail. He didn't like that. And so he found out who was responsible for putting his friends in jail, and it was my dad. He said, get rid of my dad. And they moved my dad from the Philippines to being on research and analysis for the head of, the invasion of Japan. And the person they brought in to take his place in the Philippines was a gentleman by the name of Edward Lansdale. And if you've ever done any research into corruption literature, conspiracy literature, whatever you want to call it, you've run across the name of Edward Lansdale. He was head of Operation Mongoose, which was involved in the planned assassination of Castro. There's a lot of people and evidence that shows that he was involved in the assassination of Kennedy, including direct testimony that he was in Dallas on the 22nd. And he was also involved in help setting up the drug trade through quasi-official channels. And he used to come over to the family house, and it was because of an event that my dad, when I was like 6 years old, the family went to East Asia. My mom and dad did. We were told they were going to write a book. He never did write that book. And he met with Lansdale in Vietnam, and later on when I was researching the subject CIA drugs, I was really interested in a town named Chiang Mai in Thailand, which is the second largest city in Thailand, and it's basically a heroin city. It's all the major banks have branches there, and that's why it's the second largest city in Thailand, because all the heroin from the Golden Triangle is brokered through there. And, well, I shouldn't say all, but a large majority of it is. And so after my dad died, he died in 1990, I'd been researching CIA drugs, and I was going through his papers, and I saw on his 1956 trip he'd gone into Chiang Mai. And so I says, great, next time I see my mom, I can ask her how big Chiang Mai was. And so I would go to see my mom and ask her how big Chiang Mai was, and she says, well, it wasn't very big. The biggest thing in town was a church, and she had pictures of it. And so I go and pull down her picture book, and I'm going to the page, and my mom then said, she says, and that's when I stopped believing everything I read in the newspapers. And that perked my ears up, because my mom was a very good CIA wife. She knew nothing and wouldn't tell me anything, and you know, she knew nothing. And so I asked Mom, I says, well, gee, why? And she says, well, because they've been in Vietnam before they'd gone to Bangkok and then Chiang Mai. And she said the story in the Thai paper was about this big battle where they had just been in Vietnam. And if you, she said, there was no battle, we were having a picnic. So I take my mom's picture book and I turn it back a page, and sure enough, you know, there are these guys, and they're having a picnic, and there's Colonel Lansdale and my dad, and then there was this beautiful picture of my mother. I mean, it's she's just vibrant in it, and